Welcome to the Coffee with a Geek Show. Today's special guest, Tola Atawologun. It is finally spring here in Western New York. This is the Coffee with a Geek Show. My name is Andy Wheelock. As always, I have a really great guest. I have Tola Atawologun with me today, and I hope I got that right, Tola. And Tola is an educator with a really pretty powerful resume, and I'm just going to give you the briefest resume introduction, and he's going to take it from there and give us a whole lot more. So Tola has worked as an educator from a wide range of different type of school systems, from independent, public, Title I, urban, suburban schools. So really almost all of them. His teaching is focused on social studies, economics, government, and financial literacy. So a lot of breadth there, but he has an emphasis on helping students connect classroom ideas to real world decisions. So really, I think that's a powerful place to start. But before becoming an educator, Tola worked in the public sector as a public sector financial analyst for organizations, including the Social Security Administration, the Department of Defense, the Federal Reserve Bank, and his work has been featured in the New York Times, the Seattle Times, and various other media outlets. So that's a really big resume, kind of condensed into a small few sentences there. But Tola, let's start off with my question that I usually ask. Do you have a favorite coffee blend or a favorite drink? We'll start there.
Hi, Andy, thanks for having me. I appreciate the conversation. Actually, I don't drink coffee. So my favorite hot caffeinated drink is green tea. You know, the hot caffeinated drink with the least amount of caffeine. So I prefer green tea.
Great. It's probably better for your health that way. So let's get into you and get into your background, because there's so much there, and maybe you can help us kind of define it. So what has been your educational journey as it stands right now?
So I went to college. I graduated from the University of North Carolina, and my major was public policy. And kind of public policy is like this, I would call it a prescriptive discipline that aims to look into ways to solve public problems. Any problem related to kind of, something like crime. It could be something like healthcare coverage. It could be like the obesity epidemic. And it kind of infected the way that I thought about things. How do you solve public problems? And I enjoyed the discipline so much that I went and got a master's degree in it a few years later. And then, I started working, and my first job was as a budget analyst for the Social Security Administration. And then I later worked for the Department of Defense and later for the Federal Reserve Bank. And one day, literally, I was in a spreadsheet and I thought to myself, I don't want to do this anymore. And within, 3 weeks, I had quit and I went back to school to become a teacher. And at the time I was living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I went back, started taking classes to get a teacher licensure. And as I was taking classes, I began substitute teaching. And the combination of being in school, taking teacher licensure courses and substitute teaching, that was my real education. And the reason is because at that point, I was like, okay, let me see what school is about. So I started to sub at as many schools as possible, and I kept a list. So I subbed at about 25 schools. And sometimes I would drive an hour just to sub in a place, just so I can get a feel. So I did independent schools, urban schools in Minneapolis, urban schools in St. Paul's, exurban schools in like Minnetonka and Wayzata. And I started to understand what schools were. I would watch other teachers teach. I would get completely absorbed into what schooling was. And I used that to build kind of my philosophy as what I wanted to teach. Then I moved to Seattle, and I started my teaching career. And there I taught in a few places. And then later, my wife and I and my kids, we moved to the DMV area, DC area. And about that was 5 years into my teaching. And at that point, I was like, you know what? Let me enhance what I'm doing. So I started to connect with third party organizations. And there were two of them that really, really kind of helped what I was already doing. One is called the Alliance for Decision Education, and the other one is called Mill Institute. And that is like an enhancement of the things that I was already doing. And they were giving me kind of more skills, knowledge, and abilities to do it within the classroom.
Wow, there's a lot there, and I almost feel, from your story as if there was kind of a calling for you to be a teacher, to walk away from what you were doing to totally go a different direction. Do you feel that?
Oh, without question. It goes back to like public policy and my drive, as a young man to be like, you know what? I want to solve public problems. And my read of it is that education, especially K-12, is the most efficient way to solve any problem because you have a captive audience that, fundamentally has to be there. And you're able to basically use, resources, often public ones, to inject and try to solve these various problems. And I'm like, look, I majored in this and got a master's in this to try to solve problems in society. Let me try. And the place to do that, at least in my mind, was schools. And one of the things I always tell people is low income, well educated people do better than poorly educated people who also have a low income. So it's not the income in and of itself that kind of creates advantages for people. To some degree, it's the education. And you often see that with like low income professions that are highly educated professions. For example, the ministry. A lot of especially Catholic priests, they have a good aggregate data like low obesity rates. They tend to live long, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you feel that your experience, on the government side of things, and then that vast kind of varied experience with the different education systems, and I love the fact that you challenged yourself by being a sub in a variety of different, school settings. How did those kind of form an idea of maybe an an education system that works? Um, do you have it just seems like with your breadth of experiences in a variety of ways that you've probably come up with maybe some solutions for the way education can kind of move forward and help students, and tailoring to maybe your focus points, especially with financial education. um, can you kind of link those, and maybe even throw in some critical thinking? It's a big question, but let's see
Yeah,
if we can pull it apart.
certainly. My first year teaching, I was at a Title I school, probably about 60 to 70% free and reduced price lunch. And most of the classes I was teaching were the lower level classes where basically everyone was relatively low income. And I was thinking, like, I need to teach these kids skills that they can use from day two. What can you do from day two? And when I'm grabbing all this from all these various schools, I'm thinking, like, what do these kids need? How am I going to basically serve them in their future? And I always say, my true boss is these kids when they're 25. Like, if they came to me when they're 25, when they're full adults, how will they judge me? So eventually, I started incorporating, especially when I taught a class like, government economics, financial literacy, etc. I started incorporating a lot of financial things into it. So, man, I can talk about the amount of things that I incorporate for a while, but banking. I do a lot about banking, especially bank selection. A lot of people choose banks that charge them fees or don't give them any interest rates on their savings account. Insurance. We talk about insurance, investing, and how people actually invest. And, you know, what is this thing called money? But on the other side of that, it's so you have this kind of practical sense, and the other sense is this kind of intellectual sense. I'm trying to build kind of this intellectual aspect to them. So a big part of my classes has always been some version of intellectual debate on issues that matter to the kids. And I'm always trying to merge it. So I'm doing it within an econ class, within a government class, within a financial literacy class. So an example of something I would do in a financial literacy class is a debate such as, so right now I might go, so you live in New York, right, Andy?
Yes. Yep.
So I would have the debate question would be, should the state of New York allow cashless stores? And I would give them each materials to read, one in pro, one con, and this will encourage them to understand the concept of money and how money does include things like actual cash, but it also includes things like your credit card or this. Like I can send money to you through my phone. And if you allow cashless stores or don't allow cashless stores, it's going to advantage certain people and disadvantage other people, but not necessarily in the way that you might first think. And one of the things that students often point out is the lowest income people are the ones who will be least likely to have non-currency physical money. But then the other side is the people who are working at these stores are also going to be low income. So if you allow cashless stores, you probably will make them safer. So this is how I build that kind of critical thinking part, and then as well as the financial literacy part.
There's so many questions I want to ask off of that, but do you feel this method of kind of engaging kids in these discussions, do you feel the engagement, I guess, from the kids? Do they get passionate about it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it becomes intense. So another one that I like to do is should FAFSA, so I teach them about FAFSA, that's federal financial aid to apply for financial aid for college. I also teach about something called the CSS profile. And the CSS profile is something used at, I don't know, maybe 60, 70 highly selective private schools. So the Ivy League, Stanford, et cetera, et cetera. And CSS profile is much more wealth dependent, whereas FAFSA is much more income dependent. And then I say, basically, should FAFSA be mostly based on income or wealth? This encourages them to get that kind of intellectual capacity to understand there's a big difference between income and wealth. And some of the richest people in America are relatively low income, but very high wealth. And I would give them examples of, some of the captains of industry, Zuckerberg, Gates, Bezos, they didn't have that high incomes. Their incomes were relatively mediocre in part because they got paid in stock vesting. That concept to them really changed the way that they looked at money because a lot of young people think about money as like cash money, as physical currency, or maybe as a credit card. But when they start having a more expansive view of money, they start thinking, whoa, is this financial aid system fair? There are people out here who can basically adjust their income to game the financial aid system and gain incredible advantages. Is that fair? And the students have at it. And it's probably the best way that I have been able to teach about wealth is through that specific debate.
So in New York State, they're redesigning their curriculum requirements and their diploma to be what's known as portrait of a graduate, which is supposed to be a more broader rather than just, specific, tests, how well you did here and grades, and to kind of make a more of a portfolio style growth measure for students and for colleges to look at and that sort of thing. And one of the pieces that they're focusing on is financial literacy, which clearly I think it's safe to say is a weakness in probably a lot of states' curriculum. Um, are you seeing other states also kind of adopting this? And where should New York State start? I mean, we haven't seen their plans yet. Officially, it's just in kind of concept form right now. What kinds of things should they be looking at?
So yeah, this is a new kind of thing that's becoming more and more kind of common across the United States. I know Virginia, where I currently live, has a kind of a financial requirement. I've taught at independent schools that had an actual financial like curriculum where you had to take multiple classes over the course of, your time there. I think there's a few things that New York should do. I think they should teach financial education concept throughout the child's schooling years. I would hate for them to inject this course right when the kids are juniors or seniors and then let them run out. A lot of what I see when I've taught these concepts is you have to do kind of re-education. A lot of students have kind of fictional beliefs about money. In the pre-COVID years, and this is gone since COVID, but prior to COVID, I had students who just didn't even believe in the banking system. They're like, yeah, money, banks steal your money, this, that, the other thing. So you'd have to kind of unteach them that. It's the most secure place, FDIC insurance, et cetera, et cetera. I had other students post-COVID talk about gold and how gold is great. And I was like, well, that gold has advantages, but gold doesn't exist to build wealth like owning a share of Apple does or an index fund does. So I would love for my students to have come to me with fewer fictional beliefs about money. So I would love for them to be taught about money a little bit in kindergarten, second grade, and fifth grade, and so on. I would still do that duality with the practical stuff, nuts and bolts. What is compound interest? That's essential. What is banking? FAFSA, you know, insurance, et cetera, et cetera. But then I would also put some more into the intellectual, abstract concepts. Like what makes insurance markets so unique? So we do a debate on insurance markets. And because insurance markets are one of the few markets where the person buying the service has more knowledge about them, about what is going to create the costs than the person who's providing the service. So for example, if I buy health insurance, I know more about my health status than the person giving me the insurance. And that has unusual effects on insurance markets. And that concept is useful from the intellectual side. But I got so into the nuts and bolts part. Like I get really into like the both the ends, nuts and bolts. But I actually created what I call the Mr. Tola banking protocol. I'm like, look, you guys don't know what to do with banks. If you have nothing, here's a banking protocol. Here's a bank that I suggest. Here's why. Here's a credit union I suggest. Here's why, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I would even go far as to say, and I don't invest in the bank because for me to give you this advice means that I'm kind of profiting off it. And then they're like, what do you mean? And then you explain why something like that would exist. But I think it needs to be like nuts and bolts. I think that part is critical. You want someone to be able to make a decision and do an action based on the education that they receive. And I would ideally like to see some version of short, not just a 3-week thing that's embedded into another class. I would like to see a breakaway class, even if it's just one semester long or one trimester long. I think that would be wonderful.
Have, from describing what you just kind of brought out, it sounds like you would be a perfect person to have as an advisor on a curriculum or something to bring this to students. Because it sounds like you've got lessons, you've got ideas, you've got topics for discussion. Have you thought about putting this in a book or some sort of online forum that people could get this, that teachers could get this information? Because, I myself know that I feel like I don't have the financial literacy I should have. And I feel a lot of teachers would feel that way too. And I think from what you're saying, sorry, lights go out after a little while here. Teachers, I think, would want to do this. And again, from what you said, having teachers, uh, at different levels talking about this, which I agree, early intervention is always, I think, a key. Um, Do you have anything in the books to kind of help teachers and schools and that sort of thing? Is that something that you're looking to maybe do to help?
So I'm certainly not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to it. Some of the things I'm kind of more developed on, which are the places. So the debates is something that I've spent some time developing. So, I have debate questions. I have resources for each question that go both pro and con. I have kind of worksheets that the kids can use to to kind of organize their thoughts. So some of that stuff I have well built out and, what is money or cashless stores, fast right, insurance, and other financial related kind of debates, and even things unrelated to finance. I also have a few things that are based on decision making. And here's where I think schools and the broader culture makes a mistake. It is very hard to convince an 18-year-old that the next, 5 years of their life is not going to go completely smooth. We have what over 20% of students drop out of college after their first year. And so much of our education is preparing kids for college. Where currently, if you look at all 20-year-olds in America, only about half of them are enrolled in college at all. Only half. So I think we need to have students at least consider the idea that one, college might not be for them. And if not, then what's next? And a lot of that comes down to what I would call decision education. And I used to do all of these things with how do you make sound decisions? One of my favorite things to do was there's a website where you can put in your state, your gender, your GPA, what you want to major in, and it tells your likelihood to graduate from college in 5 years. And it spits out a number. And I would have each of my students do it and then write a reflection about why that number is right or wrong. And for some of them, they're like, oh, this is completely wrong. So then I'm like, okay, you then get into a conversation about aggregate statistics. When should we use aggregate statistics and when shouldn't we? But this concept of like, okay, it doesn't matter if this is wrong or not, because I can't necessarily say what's going to happen to you. But I can say that you should plan. And that planning for things not going exactly what you wanted it to do, it's just a part of life. And that comes down to decision making. And it's something that I'm big on. And it's, so though I don't have anything outside of the debate structure, I have some of the things with kind of, my banking protocol, but I'm comfortable developing other things if people are willing or curious.
So I guess my final question here it would be like, do you have any projects on the horizon, maybe like that, or kind of what's your 5-year plan?
5 year plan is something I'm very much trying to figure out. So if anybody wants to contact me with a plan or with any collaboration, I'm in. I am trying to find ways to improve the lives of kind of young people in America in any way that I can. And some of it is how do you get young people to think critically about themselves, about the world? And other parts of it is how do you make sound financial decisions? How do you know if you're taking too much loans to go to college? How do you know if this is an appropriate amount to spend in a car? How do you know it, if you don't want to do a lot of complex investing, what should you do? VU, things like that. So I'm open to a lot of things and I'm exploring things as they come up.
That's really awesome. You've inspired me already, Tola. And we'll spend the next couple of minutes here doing just some quick, what I call uh, wheel of geek questions, just some really quick, easy ones. They can be short answer. So, I'm a technology guy. I don't know if you didn't say a lot of technology, which you can say yes or no, but what are some ways that you unplug from technology? What are your thoughts there?
Uh, Exercise, going for a run or going to the gym, one of the two. Those are my favorite ways to unplug.
Well, I love that because it feels like you have a balance in your life from all the other pieces you were talking about, the financial pieces that are, I think, are highly critical thinking, and then to kind of balance it out with just some exercise that can kind of let your mind wander a little bit.
Yeah.
Does that sound about right?
Yes, exactly.
Good. Okay, so in education, or you want to talk about a tech trend, either one. What are the tech trends or education trend you think people should watch out for?
Watch out for in a positive way or a negative
It
way.
could be either way. Just, again, an easy answer would probably be AI, what's going on with that. But what are some things that trends that you think people should look out for, positive or negative?
So even though I say there should be financial education, I worry about infinite additive to education. So everyone says, oh, we need to teach them this, we need to teach them this, we need to teach them this, we need to teach them that. And as we pile all these things on without taking something off, we eliminate the ability for kids to just have electives where they explore who they are as human beings, whether it be drawing or take an extra gym class because they like it. Take a so I want us to actually pare some things back, not just add financial education on without taking something else off.
Oh gosh, Tola, that was the perfect answer and something I've been thinking about a lot. I mean, I have 33 years in education, and I thought I don't quite have the energy right now, but if I retire and write a book, the first chapter of my book is going to be called Death by Acronym, because we just make up so many new programs and acronyms and this and that, and we never take anything off. And that's you hit it out of the park with that, and I agree with that. And I know that and that's why I worry about this piece of financial literacy with New York State, because are they just going to push this on without retrofitting anything or taking things off? Because I think it'll be a tough sell for teachers, not because they don't want to, but because they just feel overwhelmed by that. So yeah, great. Whew, that good answer. Um, and we'll wind up with this one. So besides students, who or what inspires you?
The answer is kind of unusual. The way that I would describe it is the caricature of me. So, I've taught in a lot of places. I'm very close with my students. I love to mentor students. And, students sometimes think you're fantastic. You're great. You know what I mean? You're the champion. And it's a lot to live up to at times. And I try to spend a lot of time being like, this person over here, and especially if they're challenging students, I've taught a number of kids who are homeless or in foster care, things like that. And they just think the world of you. And you try to be deserving of the way that they think about you. You try to be like, you know what? I want to act in a way, I want to carry myself in a way where I'm a good mentor to my students. I want to make sure that I want to make sure that I am who they think I am, or at least I can approach it. And that's something that I think about literally every day.
Wow, excellent answer, really. Tola, thank you so much for your time. I think what you're doing is really inspiring to me. And keep up the great work. I hope we can stay connected. Let me know what's going on in your future, and I'll do the same. And thank you again. This has been a really enlightening interview.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.